Hi, my name's Rob Ryder, speaking from West Cornwall in England, and I'm joined again here with Patrick Ponton in Andalusia. Hi again, Patrick.
Hello, good evening.
Yes, so tonight we're going to continue our conversation, carry on from where we were last time, which was basically about the creation and how it came about. So I just want to do a quick recap. If I've got my concepts wrong, please just dive in there when I've done. But as we agreed, we're talking about very complicated concepts and these words that we haven't gone to probably yet, like consciousness, mind, even the word God, if you want to do it, because what do even people mean by these words? So it's that we're trying to talk in concepts and ideas and not hitting these words until we actually define exactly. So we kind of talked about this seed of the universe, which is some very, very condensed, fixed information. Now, you spoke quite interestingly that this seed in itself is in an energetic environment, very much like the seed of the acorn is in the planet, the earth, and as an environment. So even the seed of the universe was in an energetic environment. And that seed, rather like the acorn, had the potential to be the whole tree. So everything in the acorn had the potential to manifest a tree, but how that was stimulated to grow and how it actually grew would depend on the environment of the acorn. So we've got this universe in an energetic environment. It was a seed and it was stimulated by the environment, which increased the pressure, the temperature, which stimulated it to burst open. So you've got this fixed information, which meant there was no time and space, which was then stimulated in the energetic environment and burst open. And all this energy, as it came out via movement, the movement pushed all the energies apart, rather like you kind of explained it. If we imagine a balloon being blew up, and that then created the space, and that the time was connected, not a dimension is time, but it was connected to the movement. So that's where time came into existence. And that actually obviously leaves us open to the possibility of other universes outside our own universe, and not just other dimensions and frequencies within our universe. So is that kind of a rough recap of where we were?
Yeah, that's basically where we were. And while you were talking, it made me think that when this bursting open happens, and so the energies that are almost fixed and are not moving inside the seed now burst open into their own or creating their own space. But what came to my mind was when that first burst appears and the opening is created, the waves of energy that come out of that seed, those waves really at the beginning of creation, all have very long wavelengths, or in other words, they're at a very low frequency, long wavelengths, very low frequencies. And creation, as we'll go through it today, will happen as those frequencies shorten. But it just made me think, all those people that are talking about being so spiritual and wanting to move up to a higher frequency, the higher frequencies are at our end, at the human end of the creation. The lower frequencies, God, the creator and all that, are the very low frequencies, extremely low frequencies. So in order to become more spiritual, we should actually aim to connect ourselves with the lower frequencies, not the higher ones. But that's beside the point.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation, and we may come back to that later on in the conversations, because I've heard that thing of, you know, change your vibration. A lot of people are saying this now in the spiritual world. They don't exactly explain what that means. I won't get hung up on now, but I'd like to come back to things like that in a later on conversation. So yeah, it seems that everything is a vibration. I've seen the experiments called kymatics, where people put a very thin metal plate on a speaker and sprinkle maybe sand or sugar, and depending what frequencies go through the movement, they create geometric shapes. I don't know if you've seen the videos, but they are quite interesting in how vibration creates patterns, shall we say.
Yeah, I've seen it in front of my eyes happening, and yes, vibrations are frequencies, are energy frequencies, and when they come in contact with something else, then it creates something, it changes something, it has an influence on that. Of course, when you put those loudspeakers up against a brick wall, the wall will not move or change shape. And that is because it's, if you like, too solid. So the frequencies are too much fixed. But the more loose those frequencies become, the greater the influence, the visible influence, the influence that we can measure, that we can see, that we can feel in the material world. And it's the coming together of frequencies that are shaping that world. So indeed, it can shape the sand on a plate just by the frequencies that go through it. And, you know, when you say those kind of things, I would like to just point out to people that the ultrasounds that are done during pregnancy, and that the medical profession believes that they're totally harmless. Why? Because they're only sound waves. Well, you know, they're only sound waves, but they're not harmless. They have an effect. They have an effect on what they come across. And if these sound waves can move sand, surely they can move water. And all the cells that they run through, and particularly those cells of the fetus, which are very fragile, but all the cells contain, say, 2/3 water, if nothing else. So you get you must have an effect of those ultrasounds on those very fragile cells of the fetus. And if you have an effect of them, if you change them in any way, shape, or form, then surely that has an effect on how the fetus is developing. And I'm just putting it out there because it's so easy to say, oh, this is no effect. Look, you know, the baby is perfectly healthy. Well, you don't know what you've done to it yet. You know, it may only show up a lot later, but you have done something, and it's an accumulative effect. If you have one ultrasound during your pregnancy, and then preferably much later during the pregnancy, or you have 7, surely that makes a difference. Sure, it must do. So I'm just warning people about it, or pointing it out to them, and they can come to their own conclusions about harm and not harm.
Yeah, that's something actually I think we're going to revisit when we come across the development of the fetus. So I think we can definitely come back to that. There's a lady, actually, I don't know if you've heard of her, called Veda Austin, who's gone on from the Japanese guy who did experiments with frequencies and water, and she's taken it to another level. So what you're saying there, you know, obviously we'll come back to that when we talk about the development of the fetus, but it is really something that I think people need to understand.
Yeah.
Especially as though we're made up, you know, of what, 60-70% water, all ourselves. So it's actually an important point that we'll come back to. So where I'd like to progress today was we've had that initial energetic bursting open of the seed, and now after whatever period of time, things, should we say, energy starts to come together and form, should we say, matter or things. And how is that happening? Obviously, what we can see with our eyes is a tiny, tiny percentage of what is actually out there in the universe. But obviously, we can only call matter really what we as human beings can see. So there's a lot of other stuff out there, but what we tend to call matter is what we can physically see. So if you can just take us from that energetic burst, then this formation of things, should we say?
Yeah, the formation of things, you know, material things. And when we stay close to the energies, then one of the first things that we name as material things, matter, are atomic particles, you know, electrons, protons, you know, that kind of stuff, and even smaller bits. And science tells us that in space, they come into existence and they flow out of existence. So they appear, they disappear, and it's a constant flickering, if you like, of these atomic particles appearing and disappearing. Now, how does that happen? Because that's the first bit to get some idea about as to how you turn energies, which are waves, if you like, waves of information, waves of frequency waves. So they have a certain frequency and a certain wavelength. How does that transform itself into anything that is tangible? No matter how small that is, because you've got to start with the smallest thing. Well, after the big burst, you start to create this space, and this space is filled with energies. And the energies move, or the energies are at a very, very low frequency. The bursting open happens, if you like, because there is so much pressure inside, and the balance between the inside pressure and the outside pressure has been disturbed. So there is a gap. The inside pressure is higher and it bursts open. From that moment on, you create space, inside space, and those energies are starting to flow. So what happens then is that the temperature which has caused this big explosion, just as it happens with a volcano. So once the bursting open has happened, the temperature of that field, that space, starts to go down bit by bit. And as it moves out, we've said this last time, it moves and pushes what was on the outside. So the outside environment, it pushes that to the side. But of course, when you start to push at something, against something, you push it together for as much as you can. But as you're doing that, the pressure outside starts to increase. So this field inside, which is your creation, or will become your creation, is now under more pressure, and inside it's cooling down. And what effect does that have? It shortens the wavelengths of your energy waves. So you press them together. So in other words, the wavelengths get shorter, the frequencies increase, they get higher frequencies. What does a frequency mean? A frequency means one wave, complete wave, completed in a time set. So many cycles of this one wave per second, or per whatever time frame you're using. If you start to compress those waves, the frequency increases. And frequency, you could, if you follow a wave, along its path, it's an up and down movement, right? It's an up and down movement. And when you shorten the wavelength, you push it together, it goes up and down much faster. Higher frequency in the same time frame. So when you're pushing this together, the energies are coming together, which means they're getting fixed. They can't spread about in the same time frame as quickly as it did before. So what does that mean? It means that those, if we make the switch and we take an electron or an atomic particle with a certain frequency, and we make it move, go up and down and up and down, so it is displaced from A to B in a certain time frame. But if I bring it to a higher frequency, then that means that it moves up and down a lot more between those 2 points. And that means that my top of the wave and the bottom of the wave, that those two get closer together. At a certain point, the frequency will be high enough for some of these energies to condense. You could visualize it by saying the frequency gets so high that the wave is going up and down virtually on the same point. So it goes over this point time and time again, which lights up that point, or it fixes that point. A fixed point of energy is matter. That's where we start. So the first thing that show up when the wavelengths are getting shorter, frequencies increase, all due to increased pressure on the field, so from the outside, and a decreased temperature inside the field. We now create matter. The first things of matter that we know of, or that we name, are atoms and all the bits that make up the atom, because we now know that the atom is not the smallest piece in the universe, which obviously scientists thought it was for a long time. So the first matter that appears in this universe, in this space that you've created, are atoms. Various sorts of atoms, depending on the kind of wave, the kind of energy waves that are being compressed and pushed down almost onto a point. But the process continues. The pressure on the outside keeps adding pressure, and inside, as we go along through our creation, the temperature keeps dropping. So the waves get shorter all the time. With this atom, and other atoms around it, they get pushed together. Now they have to find a space where they sit comfortably together, where they can actually stay together rather than rubbing on each other, because if they keep doing that, then they create heat and chaos. They disturb the flow of the energy waves. So they find a way where the waves are happy with one another, if you like. They become happy neighbors. That way, how do we see that? We see atoms getting fixed into certain positions, one in comparison to another. So now we are creating molecules, and they get bigger as the pressure increases, as the temperature drops. So more pressure, and these material things will have to find a place, so they're pushed together. In the larger view of creation, right at the beginning, the early stages, we see gas formations, gas clouds happening in various places, depending on where the temperature drops the most, where there is more pressure, and so on. So in places, we see the creation of gases. And you see that they are on the move, and they change shape, but they are together. They stay together. They've like the clouds in our skies. You know, they move and they change shape and so on and so forth, but as a whole, you can identify them, in this case in our creation, as gas clouds. Within these gas clouds, because matter is finding a way to be comfortable, all these little molecules and atoms and so on, and they keep being pushed together more and more. And within those clouds, those gas clouds, we see, if you like, balls of liquid forming. It moves, but it's closer together. The physical parts become closer together than in the gas formation. And in a sense, this, or what we call them, we call those liquid stars and liquid. There are even liquid planets. They all have a globe form, because, and you can test that out, you know, you take a glass of water and you take a droplet, and the droplet will always have the same form. It will always be a globe form. Increase the pressure even more, and these liquids gradually become what we call solid matter. Yeah? So that means that the physical particles, the matter itself, becomes pushed closer together, and it's fixed in predetermined almost positions. Solid material. So now we as human beings can't stick our finger through it anymore. We call that solid. When you put physical matter, whether they're atomic particles or larger physical matter, when you fix it together, you have to realize that the energy that is creating this physical matter is fixed within that physical matter too. Yeah, it sits in there and it moves about, but on that spot, if you like, or in that particular material. And that is what we have in our universe. three forms of matter: gas, liquid, solid. What happens next? Pressure keeps increasing, and the whole thing inside the field, the temperature keeps dropping. So the compression process continues. But once you've got your physical matter fixed together, pushed together, you can't push it any further together than it will go. It's fixed in that position, and you know, you can put two blocks of wood together and that's it. You can put pressure on it, but they won't slide one into another. They will just absorb the pressure within the solid matter. But within this solid matter, under all that increased pressure, there is just one formation that gives us a way out. The physical matter of molecules and so on can find a format in which it can absorb more pressure without being crumbled to pieces. And that format is what we call a cell. In a sense, you could say there's another seed. This time the seed is inside the seed that has just burst open, billions of years ago, has just burst open and created this universe. So this seed, which we call a cell, is one form of putting material stuff together so that it can absorb more pressure. And what does it do as a result of this increased pressure? It bursts open. It moves to the outside or into the outside space, if you like. This bursting open happens, and if you look at cell division, that's really what it is, because the cell, you can see it happening. The cell is actually expanding within its boundaries to withstand that pressure. And at a certain point, of course, there's things going on inside the cell, and at a certain point, it just divides, and you get two cells, but they're stuck together. They're stuck together, which means that I now occupy an outside space of two cells, not one. And that, of course, is the creation of life. So life has its seed in the solid matter that comes from the first development within the new creation, within the universe. And then we have life. So from that life, more and more cells and bigger organisms, if you like, come to life as the pressure increases, from mosses to small plants, to big plants, to shrubs, to trees, and it goes on. As the pressure increases, more and more divisions and larger and more complicated, the function of those organisms become more complicated as we get more and more energy from the universe being expressed through the matter, because you compress those energies, and first you get some that show up as atomic particles and then molecules and so on. And the more you compress them, the more finer, the more hidden, if you like, frequencies will find a way of becoming an expression in the material world. So now we've got life. And we have plant life. First, there is the unicellular life, then the multicellular life, and eventually it becomes the plant life. And the pressure continues, and the temperature keeps dropping. And inside that plant life, we move on to create animals. The early animals, the first animals as we call them, they're very like the most sophisticated plants. The most sophisticated plants also have a male and a female form. So then they're not just having seed that bursts open and a new plant happens. No, you have a particular type of seed, one of each, that come together, and only when they come together, it creates a new plant. The first animals happen. What's then the difference between those first animals and the latest, if you like, plants? The main difference is that an animal is no longer stuck in the soil. Movement. So the movement that was first just coming out of the seed and building on that in that particular spot. Now, the big change is that you can't even hold the spot. So with the increased pressure, can't even stay in place. So it comes loose and it floats around in the water, or it gets blown in the wind. The first animals appear that way. So the animals then, increased pressure, temperature dropping, more and more animals are created, bigger and bigger animals are created, more and more sophisticated animals are created, because more and more different frequencies are being expressed in the matter. Animals then move on. The next step in development is that they can't, in the older animals, they reproduce by laying eggs. And then nature, the environment, takes care of the eggs. And you get new animals. Eventually, some of the animals will take care of the eggs until the young animals appear. But that moves on. And the reason for this is that the young animals becoming more and more complicated, more and more complex, are no longer, very young animals are no longer capable, able to look after themselves, to feed themselves, to protect themselves, and to keep themselves warm, and so on and so forth. So the other animals need to do that for them. That moves on towards getting so complicated that the animal now will grow inside another animal before it bursts open. So it doesn't come out of a shell, out of an eggshell. It stays protected inside the animal. That's what we call mammals. Yeah? And there is an in-between part in the animal world, marsupials. So the young animal gets born and finds a nice little spot really inside the mother and feeds there and grows there and gets stronger. And that is because things become so complicated. So, and then from mammals, we will move on to human beings.
Yeah, so we've got quite a lot to unpick there. To see what I've got here. So there's just something I just want to quickly go through before we talk about life again. I want to get back to the life bit, but there's just something interesting now I want to mention that may be relevant later on, a bit like we were talking about changing your vibration, etc. So you were talking about matter vibrating, and it's very condensed energies with the frequency, the vibration almost going up and down on the spot, but it's, should we say, vibrating. And there's something in your book, the Why Me book that we spoke about last time, which I just thought was interesting. I'm not sure what the relevance is yet when we're talking about human health, but I'm pretty sure it's going to come into it. And it's that if you see my hand now, the physical matter isn't actually going up and down. But like you said in the book, the information that is at the base of the hand, that creates the hand, is going up and down and recreating itself. I don't know how many hundreds of thousands or millions of times per second. Meaning, as we're trying to keep the focus of these talks on energy, the matter, or what we are claiming is matter, and the movement of that is really just the energy that creates that matter moving up and through the space and recreating itself. So movement itself is always the movement of energy, and energy is information. Is that kind of a good explanation of that?
Yes, you you have the two movements. One is the movement that is inherent in the creation. So that's the movement of your energies. They're constantly on the move, no matter how much we see them as not moving, because some of those wavelengths are many years on our calendar, many years for one cycle to complete. So we can't measure it, we can't see it, we have no idea. So to us, it's like a doctor putting you on a machine, measuring your brain activity and saying it's a straight line, so therefore you're dead. Well, you don't know whether there is still activity going on. But if it doesn't move your line quickly enough on the machine, then it becomes a straight line. Yeah. We know, for instance, that we can have a heart measurement, or the measurement of heart contractions, showing us no heart movement. In other words, the muscles are not moving. But we now know from other studies that very often inside the heart movement, if you like, inside the heart muscle, if you like, there is still movement, but it vibrates at such a speed that we can't measure it. So to us, it's a straight line. So we're limited in our observation skills, whether they are our sensors or whether they are machines that we're using. So energy is constantly on the move inside the matter, because the matter is our visual, measurable, tangible part of that energy. We can reach that, we can see that. When we move matter from A to B, then what we're doing is the place in the space where this energy is fixed inside the matter, then we move that. So we can blow sand from one place to another because the force that we're putting on that bit, that rounded off, secluded bit of the entire energy field, can be moved because the force that we're putting on it is larger than the force to stop it from moving. Yeah, so that is why matter moves. Creation of that matter is constant. Yeah, as long as the power of the energy is there, as long as the energy wave is producing the same wavelengths, producing the same frequencies in the same spot, then we can see that matter. We move the matter, then those frequencies will be moved along, pushed along by other forces. But our matter is created constantly, again and again. And the proof of that, really, or that proof, it's a big word, but we can see that happening when we look at space, where constantly we see atomic particles coming into view, disappearing out of view. So they're constantly being created. So if you then take that energy wave and you compress it so that it's going up and down in one spot, then that matter is created constantly.
So I'm trying not to go off the subject, but this is quite interesting because obviously the focus eventually will be on human health. But is there any connection between everything in the universe being a receiver and transmitter of energy? So we again, I don't want to get stuck on this, but we said one level of consciousness would be absorb information from the environment, process it, and then respond at a very low level. Is that actually what vibration is? The expression of that absorption of information from the environment and the response. Is there any connection there?
Yeah, it isn't the same, but there is a connection, because you can only express something through something else. So an energy wave by itself doesn't exist, or you can't come across it. You have to have something that hits the energy wave, and because that will change it in a way, you then know that it's there. So everything in life, whether we're talking about emotional things or we're talking about physical things, it's always hitting something. So if we are, well, go back to the beginning of creation, the compression has created gas clouds. Yeah, the pressure on there is power that is put on there, and it's only because they meet each other that those atoms can be fixed in a form of molecules. So you have to have atoms and an outside something, or something that hits the atoms, that will create molecules. And we go on like that. So your life, the beginning of life, the formation of a cell within the solid matter, can only happen under certain conditions within the solid matter. And then when the right circumstances appear on this first cell, you get the expression, or then the expression becomes a plant inside the soil. Yeah. From the plants, the higher the higher plants, it becomes so complicated that they need more space, and they need more different spaces, because everything can't be provided and brought to them. So they come loose from the soil. But they have emerged from plants, and their seeds are produced by the plants and can only express themselves and become whatever animal that will be in the right environment. So the outside, it's always a coming together, inside forces and outside forces. There's nothing else. So that is where the expression comes from, that you can't create anything from nothing.
Yeah, because it's interesting that, because it seems possible that half my life I'm an energetic being processing something from the environment, and half my life I've responded and a living being. So it's kind of, I don't know how many times we process information per second, but we could have 1 million times a second if we were conscious to change our lives. Because if how we function, which we'll come on to later, is a representation of how we process information from the environment, and that's happening 1 million times a second or whatever. I have absolutely no idea, but because we can't see it, it must be happening a lot. Then if we can, I've heard you say in other talks, and again, we'll come on to this later when we're talking about human health, that the first thing to do when your life isn't working right, really, is just to stop. Don't actually do anything. Just stop and sit and just try and see how you're processing things. And it seems we've got half our life doing that and half our lives manifesting it, and the whole process, everybody's missing it. Oh, completely missing this energetic process. So that's kind of an interesting point we may come back to later. So when we've got this constant compression of energies that is expressing itself in different ways, and when it obviously looks like there's no other way it could be, because when we look at the stars, we see all similar things. Now, obviously, every environment is going to be different. So the environmental situation and information around certain matter that comes together will mean, just like an acorn, you could plant an acorn in one wood in the southwest of England, and it's quite damp, not high temperatures. You could plant it in the east of England where it's a lot drier, and a different expression of that seed, but you would still see that it's the oak tree. And so we see different galaxies, but they're all very similar created, but probably because of different influences in that area of the universe, they express in different ways. And we see it, like when you've come across the first cell, most people in science, there are some good people looking at energies, but most people are saying, oh, it was just a fluke, because they're constantly looking at how can a molecule, a physical thing, go into a cell. But they're missing all this energetic world that's behind that. And they seem to be missing that and focusing on the physical. But again, the other thing is that it seems to go towards, there's a connection between what is expressed in these energies that needs to be able to survive, especially when we're coming to cellular life, in the environment. So it's not just you compress the molecules and eventually you get some random cell, and that cell can't survive in the environment. It's actually, there's this connection between the cell now that has come what we say life and the environment. And so the cell's developing, on a pathway that will allow it to thrive within the environment. So there's always this connection between what is being expressed and the environment. And obviously, we won't have time to go into it too much tonight, but again, you've got this cell that was created out of the energy field. Then all of a sudden, is this what we call the genetic structure came to life, as it were. So that's another question science can't answer, because how did that just happen? Another thing you've talked about, the evolution from plants to plants that move to certain animals, reptiles, then to mammals. And nobody's ever really seen this unbelievable array of connecting species that would say it's a very slow process. We see lots of adaptations within these species, but again, everyone's missing the energetic process behind it, and that life appears, physical life, matter appears when the energy field is compressed enough. So even the thought of something in my energy field now just appearing, it's not beyond the realms of possibility, because I can't see the energetic process that's taking place around me. And everyone's fixed on evolution as a physical thing, but they're completely missing the energetic thing behind it. Is that a good summary there?
Yes, I think so. It's people need to understand that things can only happen that can only happen. So it isn't a random formation that forms a cell. It is a formation that can happen because of the energies that are playing and that are pushed together. They are just like the first molecules are being formed. These energies that are being pushed together that eventually will form a cell, they are looking to find a position which is comfortable for all of them, which gives them all space to express themselves. Why? Because they're there and they can't go away. So they have to be expressed, they have to be there. So you can compress it when the circumstances are not favorable to find this one format, then the whole thing will break down and it will disappear. It will literally disappear, fall apart, and then it will come back together. So the only way forward, and it's the most complex formation within solid matter, is the cell. But it's the only way, the only formation that will allow the pressure on these particular energies to continue to exist. So it's not random, it is predetermined. It's the only way it can happen. And then, of course, when we look at the evolution of whether it's a star or whether it's, you know, a life form, it's all the same, because it then is a conversation, if you like, between the inside, in this case the living organism, and its environment. If its environment can no longer sustain this particular organism, it will disappear. And we humans, we think that's really sad, so we have to keep them alive via, you know, our imagination and so on and so forth. And so youngsters nowadays grow up with the idea that dinosaurs are still there. in the format that they are depicted in our lives, I must say. But they're not. They disappeared. Why? Because the Earth's environment quickly became not suitable to their further existence. So when then the energies that were forming these dinosaurs and giving them space to expand in and what have you, these energies changed, or their composition changed on the outside. And all of a sudden, you know, it takes a year or two, but eventually they disappear because they can't survive. And that is what happens with everything in life, because when we look at the surface of the Earth, we know that new islands are formed and that old islands disappear. So even the crust of the Earth, depending on what its environment is around the Earth, will then change its shape. So it's always the connection between those two, and it's not random, it's energetic, and it's the way forward while you're continuously being compressed. And so the next expression happens, if you like, inside, comes out of the previous one, and can only exist because of the previous one. Yeah? If we didn't have any, if there wasn't any solid material whatsoever, you could never have bacteria. You could never have cellular life. You couldn't have life. You first have to have this solid material. And what's interesting, of course, is that the first cellular life that we know of appeared in water. Well, why is that? Because it had to get out of the pressure. The pressure on the solid material became too much, so it had to move out of it. Just like the plants moved out of the soil, on top of the soil, and then away from the soil, and higher up, higher up. And then the animals moved out of the soil and moved over the soil, but they still use the soil to feed themselves, or anything that is in the soil or is brought forward by the soil. And so it goes on. It's an escaping the pressure room that you're in, but it's logical. It's one step after the next, after the next. There's nothing random about it.
Yeah, so there's the couple, I'm not sure how much time we've got, but there's a couple of things I'd mention out of that. Is one is then, so this might be a quick question. One is the development into a cell, and like you're saying, the pressure, is it, in another way looking at it, is it's evolving to have the ability to absorb and know its environment more? Is that pressure you have to change because there's some kind of a need to want to absorb more information from the environment? Is that the kind of pressure? Is that there's a connection between that pressure in information and evolving is a kind of a need to want to know your environment more? Is there a connection there?
Yeah, but of course, the universe is not consciousness. So it's not aware of itself, and it hasn't got a willpower. It's not about wanting to get out of this. It's simple physics, if you like. You know, it is looking for a way out. Yeah, it's looking for a way out. So if you have a container and you keep putting water in it and you compress it and you put more and more pressure on it, it will look for a way out. So that the weakest point in the container, there will be a breakthrough. So it's an automatic process, but it's conducted, or it's guided by what is happening on the outside. It's that continual movement or pressure, and inside the continual lowering of the temperature, the general temperature, that is actually increasing the pressure on the energy waves and on the matter. And so that creates the next step. Yeah, it's a way out of a pressurized situation that I can no longer sustain. But you don't need a brain for that. You don't need an awareness of that. You just act.
And so another thing is, I like interesting concepts and people who say things that I've never heard before. So this is something, we don't have to dwell on it, but it does make you think that these energetic things going on that we can't see that we're part of. And then you've always mentioned in the seminar, things develop in 6 stages, and the 7 stages of seed. But it's all happening on an energetic level beyond our vision. And again, when you talk about evolution, and I've always had a problem with the idea that my great, etc., grandmother was a monkey in a tree somewhere. You explain it quite a different way, in that on an energetic level we are connected, but not on a physical level, because you could say, for want of a better term, we were divided by the energetic seed. And this missing link that nobody's ever found, you have to look in the energy field for it, not in the physical remnants of bones. They have to look in the energy field, if you can, people visualize that, which would made me think that when a certain level of development has reached its pinnacle, whether plants to reptiles to mammals to humans, that the seed energetically is there in the environment. And then, as you've said, when you compress things enough, they will just manifest into physical matter. So it's almost possible, I'd rather let you explain this, that there could be mammals in the environment, and you've got the chimpanzees, whatever, and then in the energy field behind that, evolving was this seed sprouted out, and you literally visualize it's possible that a human being would have manifested fully formed. So is that anywhere near what you kind of think of?
Sort of. Because let's give a different example, see if it becomes clearer. We have the color red, we have the color orange. They lie next to each other in the rainbow, in the color scheme. The color red, everything is red, but it's not the same frequency. It's a frequency band. And any frequency within that frequency band represents the color red. Or you could say, when it's expressed, then it's red. So from the slowest frequency to the highest frequency of red, it's all red. But the different shades of red, we recognize, different shades of red. We all call it, it's all the red color, but there's still differences amongst that red. And when we move it up, we get to the limit of that red. If we then move it just one step further, it becomes orange. It's an orange that is very close to the red on the other side of the line, but we call it orange. Definitely not red. And from that, orange becomes more orange and more orange, and we recognize it as orange, and so all the shades of orange. Between red and orange, red frequencies, orange frequencies, there is a very thin line. It's a break point, a changeover point in the energy field, in the spectrum of frequencies. So we have a spectrum of red, we have a spectrum of orange, and so on and so forth. And they're separated by a thin line. One line, one side of the line, it is orange. We recognize it as orange. The other side, we recognize it as red. It's the same with everything else in creation, where you have a big changeover. If you have a big changeover from egg-laying animals to mammals, there is a dividing line. The dividing line is, does this animal allow its offspring to grow inside the mother's tummy or not? It's either yes or no. And depending on the answer, it belongs in that side or that side. That's how it is. So there is no missing link there. What happens there is that, if we talk in terms of color, that the frequency moves up the spectrum and then jumps and moves back up to up through the spectrum. That little jump is also expressed in the physical matter. It's a big change, it's a small thing, but it changes the potential of what is being expressed. So the difference between a plant and a first very simple animal, we can describe that, we can call this an animal and that a plant for those reasons, but when we look at the expressions, they're pretty much alike. But this one won't, the plant cannot develop any further as plant. The further development begins here with this very simple animal, and that will then develop further. This development, this plant development, is completed, fully expressed in all its formats. So that's where the difference lies, and that is why there is no missing link. You would just have to realize that it's a small but very significant energetic jump, and it's caused by pressure. You know, and then, oh, there's a little step over the step, and we're into a different field. The red around us is now colored orange. And now we move through the orange field.
Yeah, I think you can only, this is why it's good to think in energies, because you can only kind of visualize that if you visualize in energy fields. You can't really think about that in the physical way. It just doesn't make sense.
No.
But as you start to move your mind to thinking of progression of energy fields and expressions of energy fields, it kind of makes more sense, even though it can be a little bit crazy at first. It kind of makes more sense, really, in that way. So evolution, you know, we're all evolving. There's this huge connection with the environment, and we've got potential within ourselves that will express itself depending on the environment. And it's always wanting to fulfill itself. But again, there's that connection to the environment. The environment's constantly changing. So to predict, you may, as you've chatted in your book, you may have, you know, where human evolution wants to go, But because you can't predict all the influences on that, you can't predict exactly how it's going to get there, because we don't know, there might be an ice age, there might be a tropical Earth again. All these things have changed and we'll have to change and adapt with them. But it seems that the direction it's going. But how we get there, there'll be lots of other factors and lots of factors that are beyond our control. And like you've said before, wanting to save a species, if you want to save a species because the human beings are being a little bit selfish and destructive on that habitat and environment, I think that's quite fair. But if you want to save a species because the Earth is creating more desert there or more ice there or less ice there, I mean, that's the Earth's decision. That's not really our decision. And we just kind of have to go with that, really. And just accept that we're part of a bigger process.
Yeah, and I think that's a nice way to round it up. So yeah, the environment and how everything is moving together allows space for this kind of expression, and then later on for another kind of expression. A bit like in space, the atomic particles, they appear and disappear again, and appear somewhere else and disappear again. No difference there.
Yeah. So that's probably, you've got the timer there. It's probably a good way to finish tonight. So I think it might be a good time next time to go a little bit into the genetics in the cell, because obviously with the cell we've got this genetic information, and there's some interesting things that you did and mentioned about genetics in a conference you did for us a few years ago that I haven't heard before, especially about the so-called I can't remember the name they give it for now, this 97% or whatever of the genome that we don't use. And you've got quite a good explanation for that. That for me, I don't know whether it's true, but it certainly makes sense. So maybe that's where we can pick up next time on the cell, the influences on the cell, what's actually in the genetic information in the nucleus, and now that affects our development, if that sounds okay.
Yeah, absolutely fine.
Okay. Thanks for everything then, Patrick.
Bye-bye.
Bye.